Radio 1 Berlin.
Welcome to Radio 1 Berlin. I'm Adrian Shephard, and in the studio today, Jason Oney and Nikolas Schreck with an unopened vinyl and an exclusive world-first interview with Paul Roessler from the seminal LA electropunk band The Screamers. Gentle mention, over to you.
Thank you and welcome.
Thank you very much. Hey everyone, thank you for tuning in to Radio 1 Berlin. This is Jason Honea. I am Boy True, aka the Shitty Listener. I'm sitting next to Nikolas Schreck.
Hello there, everybody.
And it is with unbridled joy that we get to do a special feature on LA's Screamers. We have a copy of the album here. It's a bunch of their demos, 5 or 6 songs to be exact, recorded back in 1978. Finally released as a vinyl album by Superior Viaduct. I don't think the Screamers really require any kind of grand introduction. If you're listening to this because of Screamers, then you probably already know something about them. However, for anyone who doesn't, just so you know, the Screamers are a seminal, very important sort of mask-era LA punk rock band, notorious for their live performances, hyper-dynamic, full of energy and loud, who back in the day, out of all of those bands, never actually released anything. An interesting concept was to actually release a video album. Of course, that never really took off. And now, years after the fact, as I mentioned, we have this little...
I'm holding in my hands the first official release from seminal Los Angeles punk band The Screamers. As the label says, recorded in 1977.
77, okay.
This classic lost EP features 2 keyboards, live drums, and Tomato Duplantis' frantic vocals, mastered from the original reel-to-reel. And we're going to open it, if you will do the honors.
Open this thing? Okay, it has not yet been opened.
Right, and I should point out that Paul Roessler, who we will be interviewing shortly, was one of several of the keyboardists for the Screamers, and I was a huge aficionado of the Screamers when they were active from 1977 to 1980. I saw many of their shows. I befriended Tomato Duplantis, who became somewhat of a mentor to me, and we will shortly, after we open the Screamers album, which was a long-awaited artifact that never happened in their lifetime. It's taken some 40-something years before there was an actual Screamers album.
It's open.
It is now open, and we're going to read a little bit of the liner notes from it.
Oh boy, look at that. Look at that. Look at that. Okay. Lordy, where do we even start? / are you a punk band? In parentheses, long silence. Tomato, wouldn't say so. / afraid to be a punk band? Tomato, it's really a press thing. I would just say we make sounds. / Volume 1, Number 2, June 1977. These songs were recorded a few months after the Los Angeles punk scene began. These 5 statements of intent transcend punk and project forward into the future to the analog synth wave of the late 70s and beyond to the present day, 4 decades later when they finally receive an official release. Sourced from the original reel-to-reels, they are a revelation compared to the countless copies that have been circulating by multiple generations of tape traders. Here, for the first time, is the Screamers' initial and legendary manifesto.
So, to begin with, we will play Punish and Be Damned by the Screamers, and this was a demo recording, one of their very few professionally recorded attempts at capturing their sound, which they never were totally satisfied that they had, but we are going to play it right now for you. So this is Punish and Be Damned by the Screamers from 1977.
Okay, so here it goes. All right, if I can see in this blinding winter sunlight. Here we go.
Everything she wants
And that was The Screamers, Punish and Be Damned, recorded July 7th, 1977, and mixed September 14th, 1977. And the lineup of The Screamers at that point was Tomato Duplanty on vocals, Tommy Gear on the ARP Odyssey synthesizer and vocals, and the keyboard player for this formation of the Screamers was David Brown on Fender Rhodes, KK Barrett, and drums. And then shortly thereafter this recording, our guest tonight, Paul Roessler, became the keyboard player. And there were several formations of the Screamers, but he was the longest lasting of the Screamers keyboardists. So before we segue into the interview, we're going to play a poem that I wrote for a memorial exhibition of Tomato Duplanty's art that was held in Los Angeles in 2014. And this is called Trippin' with the Leprechaun. And it's about an acid trip that he and I took at Hollywood Memorial Cemetery in the early 1980s. And it reflects on our relationship. So, Trippin' with the Leprechaun, a poem that I wrote for a memorial exhibition of his art in 2014.
Can't wait to hear it again.
This time, let's do it at Fairbanks' tomb. You take one half, I'll take the other. Hey, it's August. Maybe the lady in black left a bouquet for the chic. Feel anything yet? Or is it just the heat? You never know with this street shit. It's hitting hard at the rocket tomb. Escape the sun and the gaslight's gloom. That Artaud book we nabbed from the library's under your shirt. Add a cocktail or two to our caper. What? I can't hear you over those shrieking strippers. So you're a Coney Island baby, you say? Yeah, in the dim light I can see you as a 19th century escapee from the sideshow funhouse. Everything's different now. When we first met, a southern born-again peanut farmer was in office. Now a right-wing Hollywood dictator's got his finger on the bomb. Back then, the artsiest stoner girl from pottery class trudges with me through gray high school corridors. Like convicts awaiting summer parole, she shows me the contraband. Your contorted grimace on the hot-off-the-presses slash. Get a load of this guy. It may be crude ink dots on cheap white newsprint, but my world's exploding in a riot of color. One look at your manic mug, an Egon Schiele etching, twitching in straight-jacketed electroshock, and I know that the days of the Eagles, Foghat, and Frampton are over at last. Slash says you sing for the one and only group in this galaxy to have done away with guitars and other lame gimmicks. That's what got me, before I even hear a single note. Whispers of war from Clockwork Orange London and the bankrupt Bowery. One look at you and I understand. Revolution's reached La La Land, nodding out in her quaalude slumber. Sunday after school let out, Rodney's radio voice whines, "The Screamers'll be at the whiskey." Summer solstice sacrifice. I'm slashing off my long hippie hair, donning a black foul leather jacket, one of my dog's collars buckled around my neck, rushing to meet my tomboy doppelganger dream date at Licorice Pizza, where a towering cadaver called Kim tells us he's pissed off because the fucking Screamers canceled their gig due to illness. Whatever bacteria made you sick that day, it wasn't half as bad as the germs I had to sit through instead. Your no-show's adding mojo to your mystique, confirmed in full when I catch your fireworks on the 4th of July. The future's finally here. Shiny with sweat, your voice is hoarse now, from shouting about Ava, Dolores, and Twiggy. You make sneering Tommy Gear give me a beer and tell me with a disarming grin that you really dig the black vinyl shirt I bought at the Pleasure Chest. In between enthusing about Nico, Noi, and Goblin, and setting out your dream of world domination through video intimidation, you're becoming my agony aunt, whose dear Abby advice eases my adolescent angst. In that bomb shelter under the Pussycat, your face becomes a madman's mask, a new form of mutant life spawned from the coming Third World War. That tab we split in the crypt shot me a Rumpelstiltskin revelation. You've been an undercover leprechaun all along, a creature from the fairy realm on an obscure elfish mission, leaving us mortals with visions of a better world, where everybody would be made to feel important. I leave you a wilted Wilton Hilton gorilla rose at your ashes in an icy wall. You are Hollywood forever.
Wow. Well, what do you have to say for yourself?
Well, I think that speaks for how important the Screamers and Tomata and the whole experience was to me. And I think as we get into our interview with Paul, we'll actually touch on some of those incidents that happened. But yeah, they, to me, they were the best live act I've ever seen, really, without any competition. And and I wanted to write that poem as a tribute to him when this memorial was held in Los Angeles, which actually Paul played some Screamers songs at.
Got it. Yeah. As I mentioned a little bit ago when we were talking, after we both posted on social media that we were working on the show, I got PM'd by a bunch of people and was reminded by somebody in San Francisco that even though I knew who the Screamers were, the first time I ever actually heard them, because somebody had a cassette of them that I could listen to, and explained to me that what was neat about them was that there wasn't a guitar in the band, okay? Also then quickly added that from time to time there would be a guitar that Tomata would maybe not necessarily play, but would use to make noises or to bang on things and stuff like that.
He would use a processed guitar almost as an adjunct to his synthesizer. I am are in the ardent minority of people who are devoted guitar haters. So I was very happy to see a band that had absolutely none of this novelty instrument, the electric guitar. But he did occasionally use it as a kind of avant-garde, accessory. But he didn't, use it in the traditional way.
Got it, yeah. And it gets mentioned in the interview that you're about to hear in a minute, that towards the end, and I believe you actually witnessed this, at the Whiskey, I think, there was there was a review on stage? One woman, several women who were singing along with the band?
When the Screamers began, when I saw them at the Starwood, I believe it was July 4th of 77, they were very stripped down and very almost like something from an expressionist German silent movie, very minimal and bare. But they were so charismatic, they commanded the stage completely. And then as in the relatively brief time of their career, they then held a sold-out, I believe it was a 3 or 4 day stand at the Whiskey A Go-Go. They had come back after having vanished for a while. And when they came back, it was with an elaborate, almost, honestly, a little bit kitschy Las Vegas review type thing with a female singer, and they added violin and a few other classical instruments, as I recall. And it lost some of the power that the original formation had. It was still interesting, and it still looked like it was going in a, musically in an interesting direction by adding the classical pieces, but it sort of lost focus. And Tamada was such an intensely charismatic frontman, he really didn't need any extra drama. But this went back to his initial embryonic career performances in the Coquettes, which was a
Do tell.
Yeah, a drag queen, hippie drag queen act that performed in San Francisco and New York. And so the Screamers were starting to get into that kind of theatricality. But at first it was just Tamada totally commanded the stage on his own. But, I still remember those. They were still going in some direction that no other rock band was going in. But I don't think the final stage of the Screamers was quite successful. And even though they still were very popular, and they never did release this video album that they kept promising to release, that would be, they presented themselves as the future of music. And, maybe it just needed to be this very brief comet that crashed.
Sure. And speaking of that raw, unbridled energy that you were just referring to a couple of minutes ago, why don't we listen to another track, Peer Pressure, and then I have a couple of questions I would like to ask you. Yeah? So this is the Screamers, Peer Pressure, on the 1977 Superior Viaduct Demos album. Here we go.
From my peers, some of them are straight and some of them are queers, some of them are black and some of them are white, some of them are wrong and some of them are right. Peer better, I can say no. Peer better, it won't let go. Feel it in the morning, all through the day. Peer better, knowing the way. Feel it at night, what can I do? Peer better, push it on you. Got it for you got it for me.
Well, yippee-yi-yay. I'm reminded of a certain someone who used to play drums in a certain band I used to be in. And every time we'd go on stage and he'd see all those uniform-looking punk rockers out there, he would stand up behind his drum set and go, peer pressure, peer pressure, peer
Well, that song, Peer Pressure, having been, in the Mask and in the early punk scene in Hollywood, I don't look back at it with any great nostalgia, because that song captured this feeling of almost Stalinist conformism that really very quickly dominated the punk scene. Like, I remember there were these girls that knew Darby Crash, part of his mini Jonestown, and if any guy came into the Mask, this tiny little this
bombshell
club that I referred to in my poem as a bomb shelter under a porno movie theater, they would actually have scissors ready to cut their hair, because you wouldn't be allowed in to the Mask if you had long hair, which I had a few months before. None of punk rock didn't exist, and then suddenly it did, but then you had to conform in this almost communist way to the look and, the right shoes, and it became very quickly a distorted reflection of the worst things about mainstream society that it sought to escape from.
Yeah.
And that song Peer Pressure, though I think it went back to the Screamers' earlier version called the Tupperwares in Seattle.
I was just going to ask you that.
Yeah, I think that Tomato wrote that earlier, but it very much was applied as a commentary, which all the early punks in Hollywood were quickly aware of, is this whole experimentation and new approach to things very quickly became very dominated by peer pressure. You have to look like this, you're a poser if you don't do this, and it was very unwelcoming to new people.
Mm-hmm.
It had a very nasty, clique-like attitude.
And speaking of somebody who didn't have any hair and probably didn't submit to too much peer pressure and was in the Cockettes or was in the backup band for the Tupperwares was Il Duce,
right,
who was buddies with Duplanty, right? And,
yes, El Duce, Eldon Hoke, who was also a friend of mine, he was the founder of the Mentors, the band that he formed, which billed itself proudly as rape rock, which probably wouldn't go over too well these days. Mm-hmm. And El Duce knew Tomata. They could not have been more different than each other, but they had been friends since they were in Seattle. And El Duce actually played drums with some of the earlier formations that Tomata and Tommy Gear had in Seattle. So they knew each other, and El Duce was the MC at the Ivar Theater, and there was a stripper that I was dating. The Ivar Theater was the lowest level burlesque theater in Hollywood, which is saying something. Although maybe Jumbo's Clown was even worse. But so we went there, Tomato and I, together, as I referred to in the poem, because he knew El Duce, and El Duce would introduce the girls in his growling, alcoholic voice in the most obscene way possible. And so Tomato would come to be entertained by that. And, we would hang out at the Ivar Theater very often.
And, okay, so on that note, something that you mentioned either in the poem, well, you did mention it in the poem, but something you just said a few minutes ago about their stage force almost reminding you of something like an orchestra accompanying some sort of German expressionist presentation.
Right.
Roessler talks about this in the interview, and I believe we talked about it at something like too, Anthony Artaud.
Right, yes.
And Theater of Cruelty. And you mentioned in your poem that you guys, after a bawdy afternoon with El Duce in what, Jumbo's Clown? What was
no,
the
Ivar Theater.
The Ivar.
Right.
You guys quickly made your way across the street to the what?
Right. There was the Hollywood Library, right across the street from the Ivar Theater, and one thing that Tomata and I had in common was our fascination with the theater Antonin Artaud and the idea of the theater of cruelty.
Yeah.
The idea of that, entertainment shouldn't be entertaining or soothing, but that you should confront the audience and awaken them
Right.
with something harsh and, not just giving them some tranquilizing distraction and escapism, but actually wake them up. And that definitely informed my own performances in Radio Werewolf, and to this day. And Tamada was doing that with the Screamers. So we found a very rare book called Artaud and After in the Hollywood branch of the library, which we both co-stole and shared.
I believe Artaud referred to the actors on stage as being athletes of the heart.
Correct.
There's certainly something athletic about Tamada's stage performance.
Yeah,
If you don't mind me saying.
Oh, very much so. I mean, it was incredibly
Calories
energetic.
being burned.
Yeah, he would lose a lot of weight after every performance. It was incredibly intense and dynamic, and he never, that character he played on the stage. Actually, as I got to know him, honestly, I was a bit disappointed that he wasn't this maniacal person he played on stage. He was actually a very calm and gentle, and like I say, like an elf-like person. But this persona he created, was very dynamic and strong and very much influenced. As nobody would admit this in the 70s, but he was a hippie, and he was influenced by hippie street theater and Artaud and that kind of thing. And he brought all of that into this performance.
Right.
So
that's something that you and Roessler get into a bit in the interview. And speaking of that interview, I just wanted to say for myself, this would have been the second time that I interviewed Paul Roessler. The interview for me was certainly an experience, being a number one Screamers fan and basically just a fan and aficionado of that entire period. It was amazing for me to hear some of the things straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak, first person. Some stuff was jarring to me personally. Other stuff filled in some blanks. If you don't know who Paul Roessler is, I think we got into this a little bit at the beginning. Paul Roessler, he's an old punk rock vet going back from day one. He was in the Screamers. He was in 45 Grave. He was in Twisted Roots. He was in
Nina Hagen band.
Nervous Gender.
Yep.
And he's also got a solo project now, and an album, I believe, freshly out.
The Turning of the Bright World.
Right, The Turning.
That is available on Bandcamp, Paul Roessler's latest album, and very different than what he was doing 1,000 years ago in the early first wave of Hollywood punk, but still well worth listening to. And we will play a song from that after the interview. So it was an honor to talk to Paul, and he I would say, if you're interested in the Screamers, this is probably the most comprehensive interview from somebody who was deeply involved with it that you'll hear. And we got into the obscure details of how the Screamers came together, how they created music, and why their dominance of the LA punk scene rose to an amazing degree and then faded just as quickly through
What happened with that movie?
Yeah, various self-destructive and self-sabotaging actions that have afflicted so many bands. But yeah, I think Paul really, if you're interested in the Screamers, and also a side issue, the Screamers were sort of inseparable from the Germs. I mean, they were the leading, they were totally opposite in every way, but Darby and Tamada were very good friends, and I went to the same high school as Darby did a few years after, so we had that in common, among other things. So Paul also gets into his friendship with Darby Crash. And, this was an incredibly tiny scene that was referred to in those days as the 100, because there were literally about 100 people involved with it at that time. So another interesting aspect of this interview we did with Paul is his description of his friendship with Darby, he too went to Uni High School, and so we all were part of this very strange high school, University High. So, with no further ado,
Here's the interview.
Yeah, this was pre-recorded, but this is our discussion with Paul Roessler, and
It's about a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago.
right, and so and of course we'd like to thank Paul for giving us his time
Thank you very much.
and his insight. And here we are, Paul Roessler and us discussing his career and his friendship with Darby Crash and his eventual involvement as the main keyboardist of the Screamers and beyond.
Hi, Paul, Adrian, and Nikolas and Jason here in Berlin. Radio On. I'd like to welcome you to the show. As I mentioned, we want to ask you a few questions regarding the semi-recent release. As I'm sure some people certainly do know, you have a colorful past. You were in the Screamers. You also were in 45 Grave for a bit. Also Nervous Gender, weren't you? And if I'm not mistaken, you also played for Nina Hagen for a while?
For quite a while.
Quite a while. Okay. And now you are in LA. You have a recent album that came out about a year and a half ago. And you have a studio with Geza X. Is that correct? Is that where you are right now?
Actually, I have a recording studio with Josie Cotton called Kitten Robot.
Okay.
And we opened up in 2011. And yeah, I'm sitting in here right now.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow.
Very nice, beautiful.
And, it's great. I've had my own studio now for 12 years, which I guess was, and then we had a studio before that, and I guess that was my entire goal in life, was to have my own studio, so I could actually, yes, I did just put out an album this year called The Turning of the Bright World, which was it's out on Kitten Robot Records, and which I'm really happy with, because I've done many records under difficult circumstances in my house, and going into studios really quickly, and this time I really had a chance to settle in and make it the way I want it. So I think it's a good introduction to my own stuff. But yes, having this studio for the last 12 years, I've actually put out about 15 or 16 of my own records, but sort of putting out everything that I'd ever recorded. And so a lot of that stuff's just up on Bandcamp, but some of it's out on all the platforms.
Okay.
I've been really busy with my stuff, but also really, really busy producing a lot of other artists and playing with bands. So it's been the last 12 years has been probably the most productive time of my life. I've been reflecting on recently that
Excellent. Now,
it's cool to after 50 years doing music to just finally starting to hit my stride.
right. Now, before you joined the Screamers, if we can go back to that phase of your career, you wrote this very ambitious prog rock composition. Can you tell us about that a little bit?
Yeah, I was studying classical piano, and I was into the bands like Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and Yes, and Jethro Tull. I think those were probably my three favorite. I was like, 14, 15, 16 years old. And then when I was 16, I joined a band, and we decided we wanted to write a concept album like they were doing in 1975. So I wrote one, and I had just been taught music theory, so I was really on fire, and every bar sometimes is a different meter, and I was really throwing everything into it. And then when I got the studio, I finally recorded it and put it out in 2012. It's called The Ark.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it's kind of crazy that I did that. I feel like there's some it's the 16-year-old's work, so there's some. But it was fun to go back, and it was very challenging to try to recreate that. But yeah, that's what I was doing. I was working on that band in high school and performing it. And then one day, Darby came up to me. His name was Paul at the time. And he said, me and Pat are starting a band. Me and George are starting a band. And I was like, wait a minute. you guys don't play instruments. And of course, I was practicing 10 hours a day in high school, so I was very full of myself and my technique and my mastery of
Right.
music. And I was, you're not allowed to start a band.
Right.
And then Darby said to me, well, Pat can play all the Yes songs. And I was like, I didn't even know Pat could play guitar. And sure enough, they started a great band, and within 2 years, they put out an incredible album.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was
I'll
what
say.
interested me about that is the pretense in Hollywood punk was that it was all beginning from scratch, but actually the influences, like with you, and you can even hear that in your screamers playing, there is a classical influence and a very traditional, everything that punk rock was supposed to be the antidote to, you guys were actually into, yes, and the very Baroque and elaborate. So can you reflect on that a bit, like how that traditional prog rock sound, how did it come into Hollywood or LA punk rock?
Well, I think it's really a really sort of an obvious connection if you think about the word progressive. By 1977, most of those prog bands that I was really into, Jethro Tull and Yes and ELP, because I wasn't into the deep prog music. I was a kid,
Right.
but most of these bands had gotten really terrible. They had, over their 5 or 6 or 8 years that they've been going, they had become really bloated and exhausted. And I actually quit rock music. There was literally, by 1976, no rock music I was interested in. I mean, I liked Bowie. Bowie was still doing some good work for sure. I mean, there were exceptions, but I felt really alienated from rock music completely. So, if you're looking for progression, moving forward and not being stuck and repeating the same ideas and tropes,
Mm-hmm.
You start moving towards, stripping things down or moving backwards. But, that was the amazing thing about punk rock is, by 1976, it seemed like rock music had been sort of exhausted. And I think the progression of punk rock was maybe reintroducing ideas. It had a lot to do with ideas. When bands like Emerson, Lake and Palmer and Yes and Jethro Tull, the music was complex and grandiose, but there was also the ideas of, we're not going to regurgitate blues licks, and we're not going to regurgitate Chuck Berry. We're going to explore King Crimson. I forget King Crimson as a really, people like Brian Eno and Robert Fripp had a lot of thought and ideas. And I think punk rock, there was a lot of
conceptual foundation to it. Yeah.
Absolutely. So that is progressive, and that's the case in the visual arts. In the 60s and 70s, people have said, representation is dead, and they go through color fields, and then eventually they get to conceptual art. And so I think punk rock, and that's why I think a lot of those bands did one album. They were art pieces. They were conceptual art pieces. A band like the Germs or the Screamers or even the Weirdos, it was a conceptual art piece, and really the statement was made on the first record.
Yeah,
right.
What was Darby going to do after that album? I mean, where was he supposed to go after that?
Not musicians, really. Whereas Pat, by the time the Germs broke up, I worked with Pat in Twisted Roots, and I worked on a solo record with him called Root Smear. Pat's
I love that record.
He's a brilliant musician, and he grew really quickly. Unlike me, I don't know how he got so good so fast. I think there's such a thing, we call it, and it's sort of a loaded word, talent. But I think of talent only as something like where things come very quickly to them. They learn very quickly. And Pat grew so fast, and he was playing in the Adolescents, and he was playing in Twisted Roots, and he was playing in 45 Grave, and he did his solo record. And it's no accident that he wound up being in Nirvana and Foo Fighters, because he's I've got him in the Nina Hagen Band for a while too. He's a really exceptional, when you play with him, it's a subtle thing what he does, but it's really brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask you about that. Did you just say that you got Pat into the Nina Hagen Band? You brought him in?
I did. we had it. I was in her first American band after she fired the guys that started Spliff, and there was a lot of controversy in Germany about that. And she came and she put together an American band, and then she had her baby, Cosma Shiva, in '83. So she took a little break, and when she came back, we put together a new band, and I had been playing with Pat, and I knew the thing about Pat is if you write a song, he'll come up with a part that is the hook. He'll come up with a guitar part that's the part you'll remember. He's such a but he's not a flashy he doesn't. When you have a band practice, a lot of guitar players, they plug in and they start going to show off their chops, and you're like, wow, you're good. But Pat just sits there. He plugs in and he just sits there. And I think Nina's management were really uncomfortable with him. They did not see what he brought to the table, and it's a shame because I think that me and Pat and Nina would have made some really great records. But there are a lot of pressures on Nina from the outside because she was a big star, and you're walking in. There's a lot of people, a lot of eyes are on you, and you have a lot of people to answer to. And Nina has been always amazing at sort of telling, following her own muse and doing whatever she wants. But I feel like at that point the pressure. So they fired Pat, and they fired him. Yeah, they got. I know it sounds funny now, but you have to remember at the time his only credit was the Germs.
Right.
and her management was like, "What is this guy? This weird punk rock guy?" They could get any. I remember we were auditioning guitarists, and Robbie Krieger came down, and the guitarist from the Beach Boys. They were getting the best,
right.
L.A. session guys, which is what they thought was right for her. And it is true. You listen to her first two records, her music is pretty proggy. It's
right.
It's not easy music by any stretch of the imagination. So, and the stuff she did with Ferdinand on Unsex Monk Rock was also Dread Love, and those songs are tricky, but Pat could play anything generally Nina is the last person to ever cave into pressure, but maybe she did that time. And when they fired Pat, I always felt strange playing with Nina because she was really a rock star, and I was really coming out of this anti-rock star thing. And for me, I always felt uncomfortable. I always felt weird being in the tour bus with bodyguards and paparazzi. It was awkward for me. And so I actually, when they fired Pat, I quit too, and went back to work on my own music, and
Right.
I had kids.
Right. Now, if we can return to after you did your prog rock teenage masterpiece, then
Yes, thank you. Keep on track.
How did you get involved with the Screamers? What was the meeting point, if you recall?
Well, first Darby and Pat, invited me down to see their band at the Whiskey, and I went down and saw them, and I saw the Deadbeats and the Germs together, and I was studying classical music, and the Deadbeats are a sort of Zappa Beefheart-esque punk band. So they did odd meters, and their drummer played like Phil Collins in Genesis, and they were one of the great unsung, forgotten LA punk bands, the
Right.
Deadbeats.
I remember them. Yeah.
That wasn't a Chris D band, was it?
No. Christie's band was called Flesh.
The Flesh Eaters.
The Flesh Eaters, that I know, but okay, right.
Deadbeats had a song called "Kill the Hippies" that they're kind of remembered for.
Right.
Gaza was in the Deadbeats.
Okay.
So I always when I think of the LA punk scene, I think of the Germs, the Weirdos, the Screamers, and the Deadbeats are the first four, followed quickly by X and the Dickies and some other bands. But I just love them. But it really made me feel like there's a place for me in the punk rock world. And my friends and I started a punk band that I drummed for, and
what was that band called?
And Wax. Okay. We only played a few of those. And I played drums and the controllers. I was a terrible drummer, but it was punk rock, so it was kind of okay. But the Screamers were really the biggest, coolest band in town, and they were looking for a keyboard player. They had their original keyboard player who plays on the record you guys are talking about, David Brown.
David Brown.
Yeah.
They had had some kind of falling out, and I understand it because I've met him a few times, and I think I kind of worship David Brown's keyboard playing, and I really, really like him as a person. But there was just too much talent in one band, and so they were looking for a keyboard player, and I think it was Trudy, who was one of the punk rock, the Plunger girls, who later married KK, set up a meeting with me and Tommy Gear, and it was a very small scene, so there wasn't a lot of candidates. So I kind of just met with Tommy. I think I actually met him for the first time when the Sex Pistols played Winterland, which was early '78.
I was at that concert, January 14th, 1978. Yep.
Yeah, that was the first meeting with him. So they had been together for a little over a year at that point, but they were sort of undeniable band. They were the kind of band where you stood in front of them and you knew you were just seeing something that you had never seen before that was fantastic. So I just told them, I'm your new keyboard player, kind of kidding around. And the thing is, they were all quite a bit older than me. They were in their mid-20s. Tomato was 30. I was still 18, I think.
Right.
So I was really, I had been doing music a lot. So I was, I had musical chops. But they were like really smart, really quick, really funny, and they had very well read, and so I was really just stepping into some really big shoes and just trying to like fulfill my role.
And did you contribute musically to songwriting, or did Tommy Gear pretty much take care of the musical side of things?
Tommy wrote most of the music. By the end of it, I wrote a couple pieces. There was a piano piece.
Excuse me.
I Go For You. There's a piano piece that I wrote for the last phase when they were kind of working on the movie, and they were doing. The one thing about the Screamers, it evolved so quickly. The first year I was in the band, we were the classic Screamers 4-piece punk band, and then by the end of it, we had backing tapes, and we had a girl that would come out.
I remember at the Whiskey seeing 2 shows with Sheila, the singer that was brought in.
Violins. It was a dramatic change, and that was like one of the amazing things about them is they never wanted to do the same thing 2 shows in a row, and they evolved so quickly. But really, I don't think they even really wanted to be a band. They wanted to evolve beyond being a band. They wanted to be a production company and a site with a recording studio, and they wanted to really get. The band was kind of, for those guys, was a means to an end, and sometimes that feels really like that should come off as really like poser-like and phony, but in a way it gave them a distance from their art, which someone like Bowie or certain people like bands like the Beatles, you realize there's this cynicism. They're not confessional. They're not even emotionally invested in their music, which is a thing that I became really into much later in the 90s. I really got involved in confessional singer-songwriter personal music.
Mm-hmm.
But a band like the Screamers or someone like David Bowie to an extent, they're more like constructing a presentation. It's almost like Broadway. It's a whole different.
Well, when I got to know Tamada, I was shocked actually the difference between the onstage persona of that Screamers person he was and the human being he was. It was jarring how different they were.
Well, and it makes sense because he came out of experimental theater.
Right. Well, we talked about Artaud a lot, Antonin Artaud, and the theater of cruelty and confronting the audience. So
they gave me that book to read. That was part of my class.
Yeah, that's what I think was the big inspiration with at least Tamada. So were there personal issues that you witnessed? I mean, why did the whole project fall apart with all of their ambitious plans for the music of the future? And certainly people appreciated it. Why were there personal issues that led to the dissolution?
Well, it's I mean, I can talk about it, but I'm not sure that I'm the best person to talk about it because, like I said, I was 19 years old. And I was very much a teenager. I was actually a sheltered 19-year-old in a lot of ways because I had been just practicing piano, So I was pretty overwhelmed by the punk scene and with traveling and just trying to take in a lot of information, like, for example, Artaud, but a lot of writing. I think they were influenced by, Winning Through Intimidation, like a lot of books and stuff So I will say that they brought in a Dutch director named René Daalder, and he got funding. They had financial backers, and they built a sound stage and a recording studio, and they started working on this movie. And I have heard that and there was not a lot of protecting the Screamers or treasuring the Screamers because they were really wanted to be making movies, and move on. I think Tomato's health. I think those performances that you see Tomato doing were incredibly grueling for him, and the idea of him being able to transform into an actor, he later transformed into an artist. I really don't think he was dying to be the lead singer from a band, and I think that the director, I believe he put a wedge between Tommy and Tomato. He hired KK detectives. I believe he did, but I can't say I witnessed that. So I've done interviews where I've sort of glibly, said my opinions.
Right.
But I think that there was this, and then the problem was you got this fantastic recording studio and you started working on this movie, and the problem is that stuff wasn't very good.
No, the movie's terrible. It's terrible.
The movie's not good.
Yeah.
I mean, I find it unwatchable. I've never gotten all the way through it.
Nor I.
And I think the music itself suffered dramatically. So, but everything was going to their plan, but and it's kind of, I think the Screamers were this the reason it was so, there's this synergy that happened between the invention of punk rock, of British punk rock, 76, this culture sort of designed by John Lydon and Malcolm McLaren, and I mean, I see them having a lot to do with it, but this sort of immediate mushroom cloud of fashion and style, and Tommy and Tomato and KK come together, and there's a sum. The sum is greater than the parts. It's like three very objective people going, okay, punk rock's the next big thing. We'll start a punk rock band. How do you do punk rock? We'll do it like this. No guitars. All very contrived. Right. Contrived is usually a bad word, Right.
Well, in a sort of Warholian way. I mean, Tamada had been in New York, and he, exactly. I think he knew very much how the Velvet Underground were put together as an art piece. So, it was something more like performance art than a band per se, which is why they were good, actually.
Exactly, but I think that René Daalder's influence was, I think it was less modern. I mean, I saw a movie he made that was kind of a B movie. It was very, very Dutch because I lived in a Dutch island in the Caribbean, so I kind of was exposed to Dutch culture, and there's a teenager. The Dutch just love their precocious teenagers like Kofia, Tintin, and so his movie was kind of this precocious teenager movie. I remember René Daalder saying, "We're going to make this movie, and it's going to be about America. It's going to be we're going to make this movie about America." And I was like, "What are you, Bruce Springsteen?" Like that to me is a terrible concept for the Screamers,
Right.
I mean,
Right. Actually, the Screamers were very European, and they're very consciously so. They were not very American at all.
Yeah, and or even futuristic or even global, you know. But you know, so he had this concept. We're gonna tell the story of America, and I mean, wow. So you have all this synergy of the original ideas, and now these new ideas come in, and it just didn't work, and it toppled over. I don't know exact. I think there was a falling out between Renee and Tomato and Tommy at some point, but I can't say I know the details of it.
And was there actually a real dramatic announcement, we're breaking up, or it just drifted apart and you stopped working with them?
Yeah, it was kind of the death of a thousand cuts. I was it sort of slowed down, and then they were kind of working on the movie, but they weren't asking me to participate in it. They didn't. I remember they brought in a guy named Leo Hero, who is a keyboard player, and he was writing music, and I was like, I'm right here, guys, and Tommy's right there, and you know, wouldn't the respectful if you had any consideration for what you are building on from the Screamers, wouldn't you be asking, why would you bring in, you know, other people? Because they didn't even ask me, and I don't know why. I mean, I think I could have. I had written some music. I feel like I could have done it.
You were probably the most accomplished musician technically around.
And you know, I could have really used guidance. I could have, but I'll tell you, you know, I was also very punk rock, headstrong, somewhat arrogant, and I didn't really like Renee very much. You know, I didn't feel valued by him. We pretty quickly had, and you know, by 1980 they were doing the Palace of Variety, and Nina came and found me in the summer of 1980, and I was off on a new adventure.
Did you happen to know the other Screamers keyboard player, Jeff McGregor?
Yeah, I did know him, and I thought he was good. You know, I didn't really see why they absolutely needed to replace him, but for some reason he was always an interim, temporary member, and they were looking for someone to be permanent. So it might have been that he was still in high school or something like that. He might have still been in school.
I knew him. You know, we were much younger than other people in that scene. So yeah, I just wondered if you had interaction with him too.
I mean, he seemed like a not only a sweet guy, like smart, and he seemed like he played fine. He had his own image. He tended to play sitting down and looking very like Lurch.
Right.
But
and he had a band later called Interpol, I believe, that was pretty good.
Oh, is that his band? I know he had the Snot Puppers. I didn't know.
That was the one he was in at the same time as the Screamers, but then he had a kind of futuristic-ish post-punk band. So is there... Yeah,
I have a question about the Screamers' music. Whose idea was it to incorporate only keyboards? Only keyboards.
Well, you know, like I said, I wasn't there in the founding of it. So I kind of stepped into this thing that was fully formed, and I get a lot of attention for having been in that band, but I don't deserve much credit. You know, I deserve the credit of being able to step in and carry my weight. But the conceptualization was fully formed. So, you know, I guess, you know, they had KK and Tommy and David Brown. Maybe there just wasn't a guitar player around.
Right.
They have guys. So I can't answer.
Okay. Another question I had is when I knew Tamada, he was rather secretive about his past as a hippie and a drag queen and all of that. And I only learned that like in the early 80s when I got to know him more in little by bit. But did you find that too? Like he sort of concealed he was an out and out Haight-Ashbury hippie and drag queen and all of that.
Yeah, well, the Screamers were really secretive about everything.
Right, that was my impression.
Which was so, you know, I always say that I think that the most important thing about punk rock today, a punk rock musician still making music like I am at my age, is authenticity. And the Screamers, there's no authenticity whatsoever.
Right.
So it just tells you there's an exception to every rule. No authenticity. And Tomato he didn't want anyone to know his age. He didn't want anyone to know his real name.
Yeah, I never knew those things at the time at all.
Well, punk rock, it was really interesting because you start a new movement like that, and then people go, okay, we started this big new movement and we love it, it's exploding. But what exactly are our aesthetics? What are our aesthetics? And
Right.
I remember Kick Boy Face from Slasher Magazine was sort of a philosopher, Claude Bessy. And I think John Lydon's interviews and people like Joe Strummer were their interviews. We were all reading them and trying to, and I think Malcolm was pulling some, bringing situationalism and stuff like that. But our punk rockers, it's sort of gritty. Are people homophobic? Are we right wing? Are we left wing?
Right.
Johnny Rotten? Are we pro drugs? Are we anti drugs?
Right.
Eventually, people are like, well, anything goes, really. None of those things.
Right.
This is a bigger umbrella than any of those things,
Well, now people, misinterpret punk rock as being kind of woke and liberal and left wing. But one thing that I think would make people uncomfortable, Tommy Gear and Darby were very much into the idea of mind control and almost totalitarian thinking. At least they pushed that kind of thing. Did you experience that with them?
Well, I think Tommy's coming from an advertising perspective, and advertising is mind control. Advertising, you want to make people do something they don't necessarily need or want to do.
Right.
Everybody, if you didn't need to mind control in advertising, everybody would just buy what they needed and you wouldn't have to advertise. The idea is to get those people that don't need things to buy them.
Right.
So Tommy was coming from those. Darby was, to me, the most apolitical person I've ever known. His only interest in fascism was the idea that he wanted people to worship him.
That seemed like a common thread with Tommy, and in different ways, like they wanted to create a movement of some kind.
Well, Darby was, in high school, he was much more interested, I think, in being an L. Ron Hubbard type.
Right.
He was more interested in, so I think it was more this, bandy about words like narcissism, and I mean, I saw one of my teachers last year, and I asked him. They're doing a documentary on him. His name is Caldwell Williams. He was one of the founders of the special.
Yeah. Read about him in the Jeremy's book.
Oh, he's doing a documentary, and I met him, and he's in his 80s. He's just a wonderful, kind man. He's had this incredible life. And after they interviewed me about him, I couldn't resist. We're done interviewing, and I said, "Do you remember Paul Beam?" And he goes, "Oh, sure." And we had a whole conversation about him. And my greatest memory of him is that he was, as far as pure intelligence, probably the most intelligent person I ever met. At least that was my impression. When I asked Caldwell, what can you say about him? Caldwell said, well, he was a very, very sick kid. And it really reminded me, and clearly he was, because, he didn't survive his 22nd year.
Mm-hmm.
So, or his 23rd year. So, I've always gotten really hung up on what he accomplished and how amazing he was to be around. But, so anyway, I'm digressing about Darby, and Jeton Damone and I are working on a classical symphony right now, a goth opera, believe it or not. And we're really, it's a lot of references to Roz and Darby, and there's a piece in the middle of it. It's about a half hour long. In the middle of it, there's a piece called Funeral. We put the piece called Funeral in the middle of the opera because what it's really about is surviving, and what those people missed through their suicide, and how do you get through the things that Darby and Roz and some people didn't get through? What
Mm-hmm.
are the tools and the so I don't think there's back to the politics of punk rock. I think that punk rock is it's a generational paradigm shift. It's not a political movement, and
Mm-hmm.
you have right-wing punkers and you had left-wing punk workers, and you always did. But what I really want to tell you is I've continued to record punk rock to this day. And I'm recording a punk band tomorrow. And they're from the folk punk scene. And the folk punks are the wokest of the woke. You know, they don't want to use electricity. They want to use it. They are many of them are gay and trans. Many of them are sober. Many of them are family oriented, and they kind of laugh at us. They give us credit for having done this shift, but they have progressed. You know, they look at our hideous Warped Tours, and you know, and wonderful as we were, they have taken it. You know, there's an exploration in punk rock of morality. Part of punk rock has always been very moralistic, and I only will tell you that that I believe that the youth has taken it far further. And have the progressive, we started with the word progressive. I think that the young kids who are punks who are doing this very, very woke version of it have just continued to progress it. You know?
Real quick, Paul, we're almost out of time. Yeah, I just wanted to ask you something very, very quickly. Since I've ever known about the Screamers, I've always heard about dealings you may or may not have had with the record industry. This idea about putting together sort of a video album, and I heard something about you guys going to Capitol Records, and it was more of a situation where you guys sat there and said, okay, well, what are you going to do for us? You know, it's not a case of we doing something for you. What are you going to do for us? Did this ever actually happen? Is there any truth to any of this?
I wasn't in on that meeting because I was the baby in the band, but we can go back to 1979. There's no MTV, and I know that the big fear with the Screamers, or the big consideration, was that the sound, and particularly Tomato's voice, would never translate to radio. And radio was at that time, radio really had a stranglehold. It was like, if you can't be on the radio, you can never. That was how the business worked. The music business worked, was you get on the radio and then you tour, and that was the only option. And I think they had a point. I remember when we first played New York, the other band that hit New York right at the same time, and both of us like just killed it.
Who was that?
Was the B-52s.
Oh yeah.
So the B-52s and the Screamers hit New York, and both of us, New York was just going crazy for both of us. Now the B-52s kind of translated to radio, you know? And it's funny to put those two bands maybe in the same category, but you could see the contrast. What would you have had to do to the Screamer sound? And I think that was one of the things they did when they created the recording studio. They recorded a song called "The Scream" and "Why the World," and they were seeing what they could make that might translate to radio. And this all sounds very, again, cynical and contrived, but I think it became pretty evident that it's barely music. Right. The band is barely music, and so I can imagine going to a record company and saying, "What are you going to do for us? Because we're not, you know, we're going to have to use extreme measures to break this band." And the idea of wanting to maintain the visual component, it's really valid, possibly a requirement for people to get on a wider, on a wider.
So does that explain why an album never came out?
Well, again, there's also, perhaps, you know, there was no, you know, I have reverence for those songs, reverence for the music, reverence for those performances. And I'm so grateful that there were a few documentations like Target, and that there are a few people that stood there and saw it. But there was no reverence among, you know, even with Tomato and Tommy, there was nothing. I mean, Tommy actually made Geza erase the demos that we recorded, erase them, which is why the demos that were recorded in my garage, are all have this poor quality because they came off of cassettes that people had.
Why did he make Geza erase them?
No reverence. I've met some artists like this who want to destroy their art.
Mm-hmm.
And I never really understood. It must be a postmodern thing that I've never gotten. But yeah, he actually made him erase those recordings.
So there was a degree of self-sabotage into why they didn't make it on the higher level that everyone thought they could.
I mean, perhaps, this kind of analysis, like if I was a fly on the wall for every single thing that ever happened, but I think there was also a great ambition. Like, in order to do what they accomplished, you have to bring in business people. You have to bring in Tommy and Tomato and KK on their own could not create a soundstage, a production company, a film company. You need money people. You need more talent.
Right.
The thing is, when you bring in more talent, it dilutes the central personality of it.
Right.
And it's gonna begin to. So the talent they brought in really they brought in that money to fulfill the vision of being a production company and not a band, and a film studio and not a band, which is great. They could be Virgin Records now.
Is there anything that you think, now that we've discussed the whole conceptual nature of the Screamers and how I think it's very helpful for people to understand it wasn't really meant to be a band in any traditional sense. It was a broader avant-garde art piece. Is there any particular anecdote or anything you can remember that seems to you like that quintessentially captures that whole period of your life working with the Screamers?
Well, I remember the first time we were the first LA punk band to get to New York, and there was we arrived there and we realized, goodness, there's a New York LA rivalry we didn't even know. And so there was a lot of New Yorkers going, Los Angeles.
And of course, they were very much a part of the New York scene, Tommy and Tamada. Right. I mean, Tamada had opened with Blondie and the Ramones at CBGB's before that. So,
yeah, at our shows, I met Joey was there, and we had Thanksgiving dinner at Debbie's house, and it was, wow. But there was a lot of sort of snobby New York people going, oh, everything in Los Angeles is plastic. And I was thinking, like, I think now, like, to this day, like, what punk bands from New York do I really love? Can't think of any. Mm-hmm. But right. So anyway, but we got there, and we were playing CBGB's, and we did our show. It went great. There were people from the Heartbreakers. There's all this stuff. And then they decided we were going to do a party, a loft party that night. That night we were going to play a loft party. And I was somewhat on autopilot. Things were happening so fast back in those days. So we show up, we play the loft party, and there are 1,000 people. It's just insane. And we play, and like every Screamer show, because we were talking about it, the conceptualization. The conceptualization is everything. They conceived that band in such a way that every time we walked on stage, it worked. Mm-hmm. And I've been in a lot of bands. And I've played with Nina Hagen, and I've played with her where we got 5 encores, and they were still screaming when we left. There were other nights when it didn't work, Right. The Screamers, for some reason, every time we played, it was very magical. Mm-hmm. There was just something. It was the best live band I've ever played with. It was just conceived in such a completely visionary and unique way that it always worked. So I just remember, like, that show, which someone had thrown together at 3:00 in the afternoon, and maybe that's more of a story about New York. Mm-hmm. That like when the buzz is out there, the New Yorkers just show up, and they were snooty to us, but I really felt like we conquered New York, and that was very exciting. And I think we also went and saw a theater performance. Some big gay theater thing, and I saw Klaus Nomi perform an aria, and and it was one of the most beautiful things I'd ever seen. And up until then, I was a nerdy kid in a practice room. And starting when I joined the Screamers, I got to see things like Klaus Nomi, and I had just a series of incredible experiences with them.
The final thing, like along the same line of playing at the Loft Party, were you involved with the Iggy Pop living room performance in Malibu?
No, that was before.
That was before your time. Okay.
The flip side of that New York Loft Party was on that same tour. We played Pittsburgh, and I remember we ran out of money, and Tomato went to the store and he bought bread, Wonder Bread, and bananas and peanut butter, and we all had banana and peanut butter sandwiches so we wouldn't starve to death.
Right. Well, Elvis had just died, so everyone knew about banana and peanut butter sandwiches in that year.
So that's kind of been the story of my life, the highs and the lows.
Right.
I always say that the punk rockers, we got just enough fame to keep us insane for the rest of our life, and they didn't pay us for it.
Right.
But I'm lucky because I landed in this studio and I get to make music. It's been now 15 or 20 years I've done nothing but make music, and somehow I got lucky, you know.
I'll say.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your insight and your memories of all that.
Wait, one more.
Real quick, do you still talk to those guys at all? Do you have any contact with KK or with Tommy? Do you guys see?
It's funny that you asked, because about a month ago, Elvez, who was Robert Lopez, who was the singer from the Zeros, the first probably punk band of any of them. He did a tribute to the Screamers at a club called Zebulon, right down the street, and I went, and KK and Tommy were there.
Oh wow.
Mm-hmm.
So the three of us were in a room for the first time in probably 40 years, and it was just so delightful to catch up to Tommy. He was such a different person than I remembered. He seemed so sweet. And then we started talking about what he's doing now. And he's a consultant in these very avant-garde art installations. And as usual, he just seemed like 1,000 times smarter than me, and I felt like a little kid around him. And and then KK just had his 70th birthday party, and he threw a party. And whenever he throws these parties, there's a million people, and we throw together a band. So KK and I got up there. I played in the band. We did a lot of very silly covers, like Walking in the Sand and just really ridiculous covers. But one of the covers we did was Punisher Be Damned.
Oh, wow.
And we got to jump up and sing. And it was the same thing as it always was. KK starts that beat, and I start playing those notes, and we're heroes. It's this very odd thing. It takes no effort whatsoever. You start playing the Screamer song, and the audience is just there in the palm of your hand. So yeah, it's been a Screamers month, actually. It's funny
Good to hear.
Wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for hanging out with us.
Bye. We'll talk to you again. Thank you.
Can't wait.
Okay, man.
Bye.
Take care. Have a good day. Ciao, ciao. All right. There you go. That was our interview with Paul Roessler. And as we mentioned before the interview, we wanted to play for you a song of his. It is called Maker. And this song is taken from the album The Turning of the Bright World. It is available on Bandcamp. This is Paul Roessler and Maker.
Create
Okay, everybody. So that was the interview. That was some of Paul Roessler's music. Thank you all very much for tuning in. This is Radio 1 Berlin. I'm Jason Honea. I am the shitty listener, a.k.a. Boy True. And sitting next to me is...
I am Nikolas Schreck, and thank you for tuning in as well. And to experience the Screamers, you really need to see what they looked like. So if you're not familiar with them, I would recommend looking online at some of the videos that were made for Target Video. They capture some of the dynamic nature of what the live Screamers experience was. So thank you all for listening, and good night.
And just so you know, we were talking to Paul Roessler live and direct from his Kitten Robot Studios in Los Angeles, California. Thanks.
You have been listening to Radio 1 Berlin with Jason Honea and Nikolas Schreck, interviewing Paul Roessler from The Screamers. For more information, visit www.radioonberlin.com and download our podcasts on all major platforms. I'm Adrian Shephard, and wishing you, wherever you are, a peaceful day. Thank you for listening.